Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm reviewing Knitting Circle from Flat Out Games. Knitting Circle is a 1 to 4 player set collection and point optimization game in which players are trying to knit and purl the most fanciest of crafts, all while attempting to satisfy a variety of scoring objectives. This is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. I should also note, I believe the crowdfunding campaign will come with a promo pack that I don't have and won't be covering over here, and I believe there's also a way to implement or cross-combine some elements of this into Calico to give you different ways of playing Calico. If you're not familiar, Flat Out Games, the publisher of this game, is also the publisher of Calico, Cascadia, and many other games. In any case, let's go ahead and dive into Knitting Circle, how this plays, as well as, of course, my thoughts and opinions, timestamps to everything down below. How does this game play? Across 6 rounds of play, players are going to take turns moving their cats around the central board in an attempt to gather various bits of yarn. So on your turn, you can move your cat 1 or 2 spaces. I'm playing as the gray cat over here. So for example, I can go 1, 2, and then collect one of these pieces, adding it to there. Now you're going to be doing this 4 times across the round, and you're going to be doing this cycle across 6 rounds of play, which means you're going to be gathering 24 pieces of yarn. But you're also going to be getting other stuff from a variety of other bonuses. Now, a few things to note over here. You're not going to count other players on the spot. So, for example, if the board setup was currently like this, I can go 1 over here, or I can go 1, 2. You don't count the spots of other cats. That's true if there's a bunch of cats right now. If this is the board right now, my options are going 1 or 1, 2 to go ahead and pick the various pieces of yarn that I need. Now, again, you're going to be going around, all players taking turns collecting bits of yarn into the board over here. So, we're going to gather that. We'll move over here and then gather this one over here. Maybe we'll go over here and gather that, and then maybe we'll go down over here and gather this over here. So now we have these pieces of yarn. Making sure you maintain their orientation. There's going to be a knit side and a purl side. That's going to be very important because you're going to be alternating knit and purl patterns as you build out your various things in the game. Those various things, by the way, are mittens, socks, hats, scarves, sweaters, and long johns. Now, so once you do all this, once you gather all your stuff, that's going to be the draft phase. And again, you're going to be doing this 6 times across the course of the each of the rounds in the game. So you're going to be gathering various pieces of yarn over here. Then from there, all players simultaneously move to the action phase. The action phase is where you're going to be assigning these to the patterns you have. And you have a bunch of actions you can do in the action phase. You can discard a piece of yarn in order to take a matching pattern. This is a purple piece of yarn. I can discard it to take a sock. I can discard this over here to take a sweater. I can discard this blue to take a mitten. Hopefully you get the idea. The next thing you can do is you can go ahead and start knitting your garment. You can add these pieces of yarn to garments in play. It's worth noting you can only have 2 active garments at once, hence your 2 knitting needles over here, which means once you do have a garment, you'll have to finish a prior one before you can move on to garment number 3, 4, etc. So again, you can discard a piece of yarn, take a garment, you can start assigning these 2 garments. So for example, maybe I'll go ahead and see if I can do this. Can I do this? I don't know if I can. We're going to take this and put this down over here as our first starting pattern over there. We're going to place that there. Then we'll go ahead and place this over here, like so. And then from there, we're going to take this and flip it to its knit side, or it's a knit side, it's purl side. We're going to flip it to its purl side over here. So basically, the way it works is the pieces you take over here have to maintain their orientation. But the pieces down here don't. These in the basket can be flipped however you want. Pieces that you don't use will filter down to the basket, although you are limited to having 2 pieces in your basket, which means if you just don't use something, it gives it more flexibility, and there's other ways of getting pieces of yarn that will go directly into your basket. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and take this piece, move it to its other side, place it over here, and this will allow us to take a new piece of yarn. On these patterns you have, there's often going to be bonuses you can take, and so I'm going to go ahead and take a new piece of yarn from the bag, adding it to my basket over here. And then we're going to go ahead and gather this, placing it off and finishing the garment. Now it's worth noting whenever you see a garment over here, there are little points on the side. As soon as you hit a point over here, that means the garment can be finished. This could be a smaller pair of mittens or a larger pair of mittens. The choice is up to you. That's going to become even more drastic with larger pieces where you can finish at 5, 7, or 9 points, getting different bonuses possibly if you go further. So when you finish a garment is a little bit up to you. You have some choice over that. Right now, I've done a garment over here, and I've done so with an alternating stripes pattern over here. This pattern is a stripes pattern. Unfortunately, I don't have a stripes button, which we'll talk about soon, but you can see over here, I've created a pattern on this garment, and I've done this garment, completed the garment. I'll get 3 points. I got that extra piece of yarn, and because I finished this garment, I'll also get another one over here that I can add to over here. Although remember, I can only have maximum 2 at the end of the round, so I have to go ahead and use those for something in the game, which should be manageable. That's the basic idea of finishing your garment. Now again, you can take your actions in any order. All players are doing it simultaneously. I've only covered some of the actions you can do. You can go ahead and exchange a piece to go ahead and take a new garment. When you do so, you take 2 off the top of that stack, pick one that you want to add, and then return the other one to the bottom of the stack. You can go ahead and add pieces to a garment. You can also go ahead and discard pieces to flip pieces. So for example, I can go ahead and discard this in order to flip this to its other side, which sometimes is necessary. It can be a little costly, but sometimes it's necessary to get you the right patterns that you need to go ahead and try to fulfill all the various objectives. And that's going to be the main things you're doing as the action phase. There's a few other things. There's going to be grubby paws over here. You can go ahead and trade these in to take any piece that you want from the bag. So a grubby paw gives you complete control. You start the game with one, and there's various pieces. In fact, we saw one down here where you can earn other grubby paws throughout the game. As well as completing objectives. This is going to be an optional module that I definitely like playing with over here. And whenever the first player does one of these, they get a grubby paw token, and then we'll flip it to its other side. Other players can still complete it, but they will not get the grubby paw token, which again gives you flexibility and a piece of yarn. So that's the core idea of what you're trying to do here. Now, why are you trying to do this? Well, first of all, you get points when you finish a garment. Additionally, you're always trying to add buttons to your garment. You have different kinds of buttons for the colors, the pattern, and the type of thing you're doing. And when you complete a garment, you're going to add those colors, you're going to add those buttons to your garment. In this case, my garment, my mitten over here, does not have any blue, and it does not have all 3 of these colors, so I can't add a color button to my garment. It's also not symmetrical or solid, so again, I can't add a button to my garment, but it is a mitten, so I can add this for 1 point, and at the end of the round, I'll go ahead and add another new token over here, and now I'm trying to get sweaters over here that I can add and build instead. So the ideal goal is to get all 3 of these to your buttons. It's worth noting the colors are just kind of whatever it chose, the garment is whatever it chose, the patterns, there's 4 kinds of patterns in the game. There's stripes, which is what I have, where you alternate. There's color block, where you have sections of color. So you have a grouping of 2 blue, then 2 red, and 3 green would be a color block. There's symmetrical, where the patterns are mirrored and reversed. And then there's solid, all of one color. All of those will reward you with these buttons. Solid in particular tends to be one of the hardest ones because you really need to narrow down a specific color over there, giving you very little flexibility, but rewarding you with more points when you do so. Now, when you complete a garment, if it doesn't match any of the patterns, right now I didn't get a bonus button because my current bonus buttons don't match. But if it didn't match any possible pattern, you are going to take an ugly sweater button instead, giving you -3 points for having an ugly sweater. So that's the core cycle of what you're trying to do. At the end of the round, you're going to move any leftover yarn into your basket with maximum 2 over here. You're going to refill the worker spaces with various buttons, or you're going to refill your own workspaces with buttons, and then you're going to prepare the central board, refilling it with yarn for the next round. Now, the other thing you're trying to do is you're trying to be mindful of these goals. These are goals in play, like I said already. They are a module. You don't have to choose them in your first game, but you might want to. I don't think they're overly complicated, especially if you've played with games like this, and they just give you more things to juggle in the game. So for example, this one wants 4 garments containing the same color. So the first person to go ahead and do 4 garments with the same color will get a grubby paw token. All other players can still do it and get the 3 points at the end of the game. So you're going to go ahead and see what you've done based on these goals. You have matching patterns, we have funky feet, we have garment master, 5 garment buttons on garments in any combination. There's so many different ways, so many different goals, a whole stack of goals, and there's going to give you a ton of things that you can go ahead and do to add into the game. And that's basically how you play Knitting Circle. Across 6 rounds of play, you're going to go through a cycle of drafting yarn from the central board, adding those yarn to your patterns, trying to be mindful of scoring for your buttons, trying to use whatever abilities or options you have at your disposal to go ahead and most efficiently fulfill your own personal garments, as well as the public goals, while trying to score as many points as possible. And with that, we're going to dive into the review, starting off with ease of play. Like most flat-out games, this is a fairly straightforward rulebook. Does a great job explaining everything. I don't think anything was needlessly confusing over here. I think if you haven't played this kind of game, of course, it's going to be a process of learning it. If you have played this kind of game, it's going to be a little straightforward as far as the types of things. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely unique and different in its own way, but their flat-out games does a great job with their rulebooks, and this one is no exception. Game time is going to come in at around 45 to 60 minutes. I think higher player counts, a little lower. You can definitely get it down to 45, possibly even lower than that once players know the game and at lower player counts. And as far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like, which is the adorable theme and implementation, especially into the Calico universe, which somehow feels fitting in a way. Like, it says it's a Calico game. There's no actual game mechanics that are Calico present except for point scoring optimization, which is present in all of their games. But thematically with the cats and all that, it definitely fits into that universe from that kind of sense, or from the knitting aspect. But it's basically just another flat out games game that happens to share the theme of Calico more than anything else. But I do like that theme. I like the presentation. I like the cat meeples. All of those things are great off the bat. The point scoring variability is going to be the main thing that keeps me here for this game. This is something that Flat Out Games does a great job at, the way they kind of manage different things you're trying to score points with. And this one is no exception as far as how you're trying to gather pieces of yarn, you're trying to get the right pieces of yarn, you're trying to make sure they score as many buttons as possible, you're trying to make sure you have the correct patterns, you can only work on two pieces of yarn, two garments at the same time, you're trying to manage these goals. There's just a lot to manage in the game as far as how you think through what is it that I'm trying to do and how will I get those things done. So there's just a lot to juggle, and it's up to you as the player to try to find the right pathway forward towards juggling it, and that's where the meat of the game comes in, trying to think through, okay, great, well, the board currently lacks a little bit of a, green over here. There's only one green piece on the board, so working towards a green garment might not be helpful, but also if I can go ahead and clear this button, that's 4 points, clearing that button would be great. So do I think I can get a button? Maybe I can do a symmetrical pattern with this button and this with a sweater. Maybe that will work out. Sweaters go to maximum 5. I do like finishing sweaters go to maximum 6, I apologize. So over there, maybe I want to go with the pants then, because I do like my symmetrical patterns over there, and a symmetrical pattern in a 6 color is doable, but you have to work your way towards that. You have to try to figure out what you're trying to do over there. There's a lot to think about, especially as you manage those goals. I definitely recommend including the goals. It gives you that extra thing to think about that really adds a lot of meat to the decision space of this game. And there's lots of ways to drive endgame, not drive game, there's lots of ways to try to figure out what you're trying to do and where to score points. There are some people going to be just focusing on just completing the goals as fast as possible, regardless of what it means for their personal buttons. That is a viable strategy. It's also viable to go ahead and work towards your buttons and ignore the personal goals and get as many buttons done as possible. That's another viable strategy. And you'll frequently have to choose between which of those things you want to do, because not everything's going to line up all the time, and so you are trying to figure out how you're getting towards, well, victory in this game as you play it. And the request cards, they really do guide both. There's two kinds of requests. There's, well, these over here and these. And both of them are going to guide you in different directions, as well as the individual tiles you get, as well as the board itself. So again, you're just working with limited things as a player, trying to figure out how to make it all work towards your advantage. Now, as far as things I don't like in the game, I kind of mentioned that, when you have these things, they won't always work in tandem. Sometimes the goals you're going for are going to be different than your personal buttons, are going to be different than the garments you get out, and or the buttons, the colors of knit on the table, or even what the players take. There won't always be direct synergy, and the problem is, that doesn't bother me in and of itself, but sometimes there is direct synergy. And so the fact that sometimes you'll have a player who's able to successfully work on a public goal as well as working on their personal buttons, and they'll work in tandem, and other players might not have that. The player who has that is just playing at a strong advantage, because different things pull them. When you as a player have different things pulling you in different directions, versus when you as a player have different things pulling you in the same direction, inherently you are more rewarded for working in the direction that rewards multiple factors. And that's just luck of the draw as far as how the game's going to play out. The other thing I don't like is the fact that there's stacks and stacks of patterns over here. So we have our long johns over here. There's stacks of patterns, but I don't think they're meaningfully different as far as the patterns itself. Meaning at the bottom of patterns, you do have scoring goals, which will reward you for different combinations of things, which again is another factor you're trying to consider when you're thinking through how you're going to score points. If you're going to be scoring points for different color blocks, so you score 2 points for every color block, you're going to want to work towards color block. But again, you might not get color blocks over here, so you're just kind of victim to whatever is going to show up over there, but I do like these overall. But the actual patterns themselves in the cards, I wish these were more variable as far as the different kinds of things they did for you in the game, different abilities or whatnot, because usually when you draw one of these, you're just looking at the bottom, which is nice, but I just wish, given how many patterns there are in the game, I wish there was more to distinguish one pattern from another. I think there's a lot more that they can do with that concept. As far as what I can see others not liking, trading in yarn to get to the other side of yarn really feels like a bad trade-in. It's one that I almost always do my absolute darndest best to try to avoid. Darndest, that's a knitting joke if you think about it. But I try to do my darndest to avoid trying to trade in yarn just to flip to the other side. But when you do need to do so, to me that's just not a feel-good moment. You're paying twice as much for a piece of yarn. I wish there was even just a better currency ratio. Even as simple as trade in one piece to flip 2 pieces, even that would just give you more of a feeling of like, okay, great, that trade-off is more worth it, versus 1 for 1 is just double paying for a spot. I almost always try to avoid that, and again, that goes back to the aspect of sometimes things work out in combination, and sometimes you're choosing between 2 different things in the game, or 3 or 4 or 5 different things in the game. As far as final thoughts on Knitting Circle, as most Flat Out games, I overall enjoyed this game. I do think I found it a bit less satisfying than some of their other games, because I think in general, with Flat Out games, they usually do a great job at forcing players to consider multiple options, But I think more so in Knitting Circle than in their other games did I constantly feel the pressure of choosing between times where the game forced me in different directions, when that's not always the case depending on which game you're playing, depending on, the different players at the table, depending on what you get in general. Sometimes things worked well in tandem and sometimes things don't. Again, if you draw a card that says, hey, go for a color block, and then you just don't get color block as tokens, there's not a lot of agency you have around that, and more so than in their other games, I sometimes felt cornered by what the game wanted me to do to optimize my score versus what the game let me do based on what I drew. I felt a little less agency here compared to the other games. I still enjoyed it. I still think it's a good point scoring optimization puzzle. I think it's an adorable theme, but it definitely is coming in a drop more frustrating for me than some of the other games. Overall, this is a 3.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it. I like it. I wish there was more flexibility in some different ways to deal with that random nature of the way things show up in the game. As far as game recommendations, first of all, definitely check out Calico if you like this game. Calico is a mean, tight game with a lot to juggle in different ways. Well, I don't know if it's mean, it's a tight game with a lot to juggle and a lot to think through as you play. And if you want a game that's going to have you crafting various goodies, check out Creature Comforts from KTPG. It's another game that has you crafting various, knit, yarn, goodies, and other things as well, in an equally delightful theme. In any case, then as always, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.